Everyone, welcome to VanRuby. Today we have a special guest, Q&A with Avdi. Should be fun. We have a lot of questions that we probably get through. We'll see how we get to in the next hour. Today's meetup sponsored by Supercast. We are hiring. If you guys are looking, talk to me. Clio is also our sponsor. They provide the meetup link. If you guys have questions, I'm sure Alex will be more than happy to help you out. And Unbounce, and they provide the space when we're actually meeting together, hopefully soon, now that everything is opening up. And now I'm going to turn off my screen again so you can see our faces. And welcome, Avdi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Hello. I'm really glad to join you.
Yeah. So I just messaged Avdi randomly and I was like, hey, do you want to do a meetup and see what happens? But I think this is a little bit better Q&A. So we have a lighter side of meetup, especially this Thursday afternoon.
I love Q&As.
Yeah. So we got our first question. Oh, anyone who has a question, just feel free to type it in. I'm going to look in the chat later. But yeah, first question, do you drink coffee or tea? And what kind of tea do you like drinking, or coffee?
Both. This is coffee right now. Mostly coffee. And
Mostly coffee.
Tea is more of a special occasion.
And how many cups of coffee do you drink in a day?
It varies. At least 2 usually.
At least
sometimes 2. More. Yeah, I don't know, every maybe year or so, I kind of go on a sabbatical for a couple of weeks to kind of, rejuvenate my system.
Yeah.
Rejuvenate my adrenal system, but
yeah, that's awesome. Next question we have is, what's your favorite gem, or do you have any favorites?
Oh yeah, I should have spent more time thinking about this one. I'll tell you one that I don't see like mentioned a lot, but I've used it so much over the years, is called Moneta.
Moneta.
Yes. And what it does is it gives you a consistent hash style interface over pretty much any kind of key value store you could think of. So like the obvious ones like Redis and stuff like that, but also like a table in a database, or files on your disk, or a single YAML file with keys and values on your disk, or a JSON file, or, and of course, all the usual key value stores, Memcache, stuff like that. And so you can, it's just something that like, I don't see mentioned enough. And I feel like I've thrown it into so many projects over the years because I just needed to be able, I needed some kind of cache or something, and one where I could start out just caching it in a hash in memory, and then switch it over to being persisted without changing the code at all, while changing, only changing the code, wiring it together.
Interesting. So it probably is very easy to store something really quickly in the database once you have it cached.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Does it support like joins as well?
Which? Oh, join? No, it's very simple. It's just straight up like key values.
Key values.
And it supports the whole hash API. So it has fetch, which if anybody's followed my work, I'm a huge fan of fetch. I'm still trying to make fetch a thing. And it supports that. You can do the thing where it's like, if it's there, give me the value. If it's not there, execute this block. That kind of stuff.
That's really awesome.
And it also has a little bit of expiration support for the stores that support some kind of expiration. So you can say, blow it away if you find it, but it's been an hour or something. Pretend you didn't find it.
Wow, that's a really handy feature.
Yeah.
You've talked about fetch a bit. That's very interesting because I read your books, and Alex and I were actually a big fan of fetch after we've read the books. And everyone who's worked with us, our first comment when we're reviewing pull requests, if we see a hash, if it's not fetch, change it. the default parameter for a fetch is just so useful. Don't use digs.
Yeah, don't use it. Yeah, if you're gonna do an or, use fetch instead.
Yeah. What have you been working on these days? Yeah.
So for the past year or so, I kind of like stepped back from I'm not doing as much consulting, and I there was a period where I was like trying to get a real job, and that went badly.
Oh,
And so I kind of like stepped back and reconsidered and decided to kind of throw myself headlong back into running my banana stand, which for me, banana stand is kind of a blanket or umbrella term for like Ruby Tapas now, which is now Graceful Dev, and the courses that I put together from that over the years and my ebooks and stuff like that. So basically just kind of hurled myself headlong back into content creation, and also a lot of kind of content gardening these days, making things more accessible, and tying everything together.
that's
Yeah, a
really
lot of
good. We're huge fans of Ruby Tapas. Every morning before our stand-up, we watch a random video of Ruby
Wow,
Tapas.
it's amazing.
We used to do it on random, but sometimes you get to a video that is a part two. So you
Right.
kind of gotta have to go back. So we did it sequentially. So we did it all over again. We watched so many. So where do you
Well, one of the wonderful things about
yeah,
Graceful Dev, you know, I'm honor bound to pitch my stuff a little bit, and
yeah, yeah.
now that it's all moved over to graceful.dev, it's finally like a courseware style interaction, you know, UX. So you can finally mark them as, yes, I watched this one. But I've got like the whole, I have it, I'm slowly breaking it down into smaller courses, but I also have the entire Ruby Tapas history in a course called the Tapestry, and it's divided up by year.
Yeah. Which goes really well for my next question is how do you come up with ideas and what to talk about in Graceful Dev? There's so many that you've covered from CSV to match, regex. Where do you come up with those ideas?
You know, everybody always thinks that I must like run out of ideas eventually, and that has like been the least of my worries for the entire time I've run that show, because you know, early on, so I spent a long time doing consulting pair programming, where people would just basically buy a couple hours of my time, or we would meet up, you know, periodically over a course of weeks or something, and we would work together on whatever they wanted to work together on. And I still do that from time to time if anybody's interested in that. But I got to see so many people's perspectives, so many like what people were struggling with, so many people's different projects. A ton of my early material came out of just, I would jot down a note. I would show them something, and they'd be like, "Oh, wow," you know, and I'd be like, "Oh, okay, not everybody knows how to do that. Okay," and I would jot that down. You know, I kept a file in Evernote, and still do, and I just keep going through that for ideas. And the same thing for consulting work. I would jot down ideas from that. Yeah, it's endless.
It's endless. Do you have any favorite episode that you've done, or most popular one that people always refer
You know,
to?
everybody loves the fetch one. You know, the most popular one of all time is probably the bare words one. That's the one that most people point to as like, this one blew my mind. Or like, you know, help me understand how Ruby works better. I don't have a favorite. Periodically, I'll be going back through the archives for one reason or another, and I'll play one. I'll be like, wow, that's actually pretty decent. I enjoy the ones where I got to be a little bit goofy, although, you know, now like on the spot, I probably can't think of one off the top of my head.
One of my favorites is I can't remember what it is called, but you have a class, but it's not really a class. It's a function where you can pass anything to it, kind of like the integer class, and you can just have a parameter passed.
Oh yeah,
like conversion function?
Conversion functions. Yeah,
Conversion function. That was one of my favorites when I had to do a lot of math,
Hmm.
and just converting an integer to an actual foot or meter
Right.
makes it a lot easier to parse and to pass around.
Yeah, as series go, the mini series on implementing the whole value pattern was a lot of fun, and I'm pretty proud of that one because I feel like that was a topic that not a lot of people were exposed to, because it's one of those patterns that's not in the Gang of Four, and
Ah,
Ward Cunningham's work is just, I mean, I happen to know that one of your later questions in the list, at least, is what, should junior programmers study, and definitely anything that Ward Cunningham has ever written is on that list.
Ward Cunningham.
Yeah.
I'm gonna jot that down.
He invented the wiki.
Oh, very interesting.
Ward is kind of like, you know how how not everyone listens to Radiohead, but every band for a long time would cite Radiohead as one of their influences?
Yeah, yeah.
Ward Cunningham is kind of like that of programming.
So did Ward Cunningham do the primitive obsession?
Well, the whole value pattern is at least a way of getting away from primitive obsession. So
Okay.
he was certainly one of the early ones to talk about that. Anytime you like chat with Kent Beck about stuff, eventually he'll be like, well, Ward of it originally came up with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Still on my like short list of folks that I haven't gotten a chance to meet yet and would love to and chat with.
That's really awesome. I'm gonna pivot to the slightly heavier questions. What is what are some of the most memorable experience you've had while consulting or pairing?
Consulting experiences are surprisingly similar. Like the thing that stands out there is everyone thinks they have the worst code base in the world, and they're very embarrassed of it. And they're all pretty similar, honestly. Like, and there's obviously some bias there in like who hires me. But yeah, everyone's code base isn't, as at least comparatively, it's not as bad as as they think it is compared to the rest of the world. Things are pretty like level out there in my experience. But that's not like that's like a non-notable experience. One thing that I was thinking about this earlier, one thing that sticks in my mind is I was consulting for a company that sold event tickets, and like the Cucumber
Yeah.
framework and like that like language, Gherkin language or whatever for expressing requirements. That stuff catches a lot of flack. A lot of people dislike it for one reason or another, and there are some understandable reasons, especially the way it's been used on a lot of projects. Yeah. But there was this QA guy on this project who had come from like the event back, like he had come from theater or something, and so he was super familiar with the customer side of things. And he was responsible for us making the product better by filtering their requests and putting it into a language that we could understand. And somebody taught him that given, when, then format at some point, and he just glommed onto it. And it was like he wrote the most beautiful, like we could just like take those tickets at that, once he understood that format, we could take those and just translate them into tests. So that one sticks in my head because it was just like, I've heard so many people being like, nobody uses these to communicate between like between people on the business and developers, and I'm like, I beg to differ. It's one of the best experiences I've ever had in that interface.
That's really cool. A lot of people hate it, but in my experience, it's really useful having Cucumber test, especially the high level ones. You change something blows up, good.
Yeah, it's really easy. The problem is it's really easy to treat them as another programming language. And I've seen a lot of groups, that's where they bog down with it, and bad feelings set in, is they treat it as a programming language. They try to create abstractions in it. They try to reuse step definitions everywhere. And that's just a nightmare. Like, you have a perfectly good programming language. If you are not able to think at the cucumber level for whatever reason, if you don't have that like sort of organizational maturity, then just write code. Because otherwise it's just going to be, it's worse than code. But if you have customers or people that are at that interface between the customer and developers who can express it in those terms, and then you can turn those into your tests, it can be pretty great.
Yeah, I've seen it in my previous job as well, where sometimes our QA guy just writes given when then, it just clicks for all of the developers. It's very easy, and it's really easy to replicate bugs that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think this segues a little bit into one of my other like pet topics, which is you should be, I think you should be really like quick to write tests, but also quick to throw them away. And a Cucumber test suite is definitely one of those things that can start getting in the way real fast. And when you see people spending a ton of time in their PRs just trying to make all the old tests happy, that's where you need to have a conversation about, it's okay to hack and slash. Like, if you spent that much time just trying to fit your code change into this test's idea of how things are supposed to be, stop trying to understand the test, just throw it away. And adjust your review process so that people aren't like, oh my God, you threw away a test.
Yeah, a lot of people get surprisingly angry when I remove tests. How would you approach testing in general? Would you do just happy path, or would you test for the edge cases?
Oh man, that's a big question. How much of Ruby Tapas have I devoted to that? Yeah, I don't know. There's not a simple answer there. And these days I am more and more focused on the idea of how much can we test in production. And that's a whole other conversation too.
Yeah.
My thoughts these days, the framework of my thoughts around testing is basically maturing as a coding team. A big part of it is extending the radius of your REPLs, your read, eval, print loops, to larger and larger circles until it encompasses your entire software lifecycle. And that's really what Agile is too. At the high level, that's what Agile practices are, is moving that REPL out. And so, these days, I think I'm thinking a lot about what it means to have observability baked in, so that we can start saying, we're going to know if this is working because we know these are the signals we're going to get if it's working and in use, which that's another thing that people forget to test for. You can test backwards and forwards that it's correct. That does not mean anybody is going to use it. And you can be so loaded down by code that is well tested and works perfectly and nobody's using it. Sorry, that kind of got off topic.
Oh, no,
broadly
speaking,
really sort of coming back down to earth. I've always really liked it where I understand the problem well. I've always really liked kind of working outside in. I really like having high level tests, but only like fairly basic ones that tell me when I'm done. And then I like to, if I hit a point where I've spent like an hour without changing my tests and I'm still trying to satisfy the one that I'm on, I'm like, okay, now it's time to ratchet down to a smaller scope and write a smaller test. Maybe it's a functional test, maybe it's a tiny little unit test. But I watch for that long stretch of not changing a test, not writing a new test or changing a test to tell me that it's time to switch my focus on where I'm writing tests.
That's a really good way to do it. This one is one of my favorite questions, actually. I've heard you used to work with embedded systems in aircraft.
Yes.
And what are some challenges in that RA? And my notes got mangled. in that area, and what kind of stuff did you find you can bring over to apply to web development?
Yeah, so I did kind of cut my teeth on real-time embedded work, as well as a bunch of like C++ networking middleware and things like that. It was all kind of broadly around the area of radars and air traffic control. And I mean, the challenges are just that hardware is the worst. Dealing with hardware, I don't know. There was this point of like 10 or so years ago, and everybody got really excited about doing makery things with hardware. You know, a lot of software people got really excited about building things with hardware, Arduino and stuff like that. And I was like, why would you want to? I got away from that. Hardware is terrible. But that's just my own trauma speaking. It's actually wonderful to work with real physical objects. But yeah, the interesting thing for me has been realizing, like watching how some of the lessons of embedded have come around full circle to really apply more and more to the stuff that we do. And particularly what that means is we worked with systems that there was a limit to how much you could unit test them. And even like what we called unit tests were like, there was a physical box that you plugged that was the test set that you plugged the other physical box into, and that was the unit test set. And it tested a whole ass computer. But like, there was just a limit to how much you could know in a static setting. And there was a lot of, and there was a limit to how much you could run locally. Like there were just systems you couldn't simulate locally. There was no such thing as Docker. They ran on they didn't just run on a different computer. They didn't just run in a different room. They ran on x86 while the thing you're working on was 68,000. You had to do like little endian, big endian conversions between them. And so like you couldn't just have it all running on your machine. That was not a thing. And so you had to make fakes, you had to do simulations, and then you also had to have like golden systems that you would just talk to. And so, one of the things that struck me in that world was that every system spent, it would divide up its operations into chunks of time, and it would spend some of those chunks of time testing itself. And then there was a central system that would spend part of its cycle just sending some fake tracks out through the system. They were tagged as fake tracks, but then it would make, it was waiting to see that it got them back from the right, other systems. And it was just doing that and doing it and doing it. And every day that ATC system is helping planes land, every a section of every second is dedicated to, am I still working? Am I still working? Am I still working? And that's observability. That's the acknowledgement that we have so many services that we cannot possibly just verify their correctness. And also bad things happen, and neutrinos come shooting through our CPUs. And ultimately, the only true test is in production, and the only true test is in just doing it over and over again and checking that our assumptions about the world are true. So that's kind of like, I feel like that's kind of come around full circle.
Wow, that's very interesting. I'm guilty. I actually bought an Arduino last year, and I got some Raspberry Pis in my place. But I think it's fun having something that is tangible and not just a concept.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. The first time you make that red light, come on.
Yes, just blink. That's it. Alex has a question. Going back to the test, how do you approach figuring out what test you should delete? Or do you find yourself rewriting tests after deleting them?
What test to delete? If it's flaky and I don't understand it, and nobody I can find really understands it, flaky, or it's just I can't figure out how to make it happy and I don't understand it, there comes a point
Mm.
where I need to get rid of it and move, and maybe put in a ticket for like, maybe we should test this area in a way that we actually understand, maybe at a higher level. Maybe, I might look up at a higher level and say, okay, do we have something that's exercising this code at a higher level? Okay,
So
that I can
something
delete
that,
this unit test.
yeah. Mhm.
I write unit tests first and foremost as design aids, as a way of sort of working through, in a tangible way, working through how I want to write the code and figuring it out incrementally. It's that REPL again. And so from my, in my practice, once I get that code working from that TDD cycle, the tests have already served their primary purpose, and everything after that is gravy. It's all extra, it's all added value at that point. Any kind of regression testing is the word I'm looking for, is added value at that point. So yeah, I don't know. I view them as pretty disposable.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. Thiago and Stephanie has a question. Do you record all the videos yourself, edit, and how do you keep yourself from burning out after so many years?
Okay, do I record them myself? Yes, I do. I've done larger processes in the past in which I kind of divested more and more of it to other people and delegated. But I've kind of brought it all back in. If it's one of my episodes, if it's not a guest episodes are their own thing. But if it's not a guest episode, then I pretty much do all the work myself these days. I do have somebody who helps me with some types of video editing, although I haven't had them help me with like an episode much. It's more about like longer videos where I'm working with somebody else. What was the other part of the question?
How do you keep yourself from burning out after so many years?
That's a tricky one. Before this current period where I kind of brought all my focus back to the banana stand, I was kind of burnt out, and I was looking around, I was casting about for a new direction. And I got myself a longer term consulting gig, and it was at least 6 months, might have been longer. And I was working at pretty fair amount of hours, and like that really, like working with that team, it really it gave me lots of new inspiration for stuff to write about, and it also reminded me, some of the things that I don't enjoy about reporting for duty every day. Yeah, so like after that period, I was like, oh, okay, I actually have the bug to make videos all the time again.
Nice.
So yeah, variation, seasons.
That's awesome. Their question is actually, there's a second question from Thiago and Stephanie. They're a course creator as well. Can you share something that was helpful when you transitioned from developer to a business owner? Things like marketing, writing content, creating process, and growing business.
There's a lot to say here, and I will say I've started writing up some of the answers to that question in a series of blog posts on my blog site, which is avdi.codes. And so if you look for stuff that's tagged banana stand, and I can provide an actual link to that later. But I've started writing up just like some of the things that I've learned over the years from running that kind of business. I don't know, maybe if there's like is there a more specific, because there's so much to talk about there, just so much.
Yeah, very, very broad. Thiago and Stephanie, would you like to write something, or is there a specific part to that?
Yeah, so I really love the blog post about the banana stand, by the way. Thanks for writing them, they're super useful. So we talked with Noah Gibbs and Pat Maddox about that, which is it's really hard to keep going when you're a course creator, especially for Ruby developers. There are not many people that kept going for more than like 5 years. We only have like Chris Oliver, Avdi maybe a couple of others.
Mhm.
I'm just curious about, is there something that helped you make more money, or was it marketing or content marketing that helped you? Something that you could share?
So I am straight garbage at marketing. I almost entirely ignore it. I feel like I got really lucky. Like I want to be really careful about, there's so much bullshit in this business about this is how you do it. This is how you make it. There's so much hustle porn, and it's all extremely, it's all extremely survivor biasy, so I don't know. Certainly, like a lot of my early content played into what I created later. I didn't start writing ebooks until I'd done some talks, and those really kind of flowed out of the talks. I didn't start doing talks until I had been blogging for a long time, and a lot of people had enjoyed some of the blog posts, and so I had some notoriety from that, and from Twitter and things like that. Right. I will give you like my advice zero for everyone who I talk to about this, which is the best time to start your mailing list was 10 years ago, and the second best time is right now. That's really like the biggest piece. I think that one piece is pretty consistently true. Not necessarily true for people in wildly different industries, but as far as like content in this industry, you don't make money from social media. Where you really make a connection and where you have people that are like, yes, take my money, that's an email. So that's like advice number 0. Also, that's just like, that's where you get the connections that keep you going too. That's where you get the people, writing back and being like, I really liked this thing that you wrote. Can you expand on that? I was like, oh, I didn't realize anybody cared about that piece. So yeah.
We have another question from Jono. What approach would you do to bring a motivated intermediate or senior from 0 to hero in Ruby and Rails as part of onboarding?
Get them a graceful.dev account.
Yeah.
No.
I did put that at the end of it. I said, other than your platform. So.
Right.
No, seriously though, that is not the first advice. I mean, okay. One thing that stuck out to me in all the work that I've done, especially all the consulting and stuff, there is no mechanism more effective at transferring context and knowledge and idioms and everything that you need to like get up to speed on a code base than either pairing or, these days people are grouping more, which grouping or ensemble programming, mobbing, whatever you want to call it, is actually pairing only easy mode. A lot of people think it's like the next level up and harder, but it's actually easy mode. Anyway, there is, in my experience, there is absolutely nothing that substitutes for that. It's just the bandwidth is so much higher for knowledge transfer than anything else you could possibly do. For God's sake, do not try to bring people up from 0 by reviewing their fucking pull requests. Sorry, I have strong feelings about that one.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is kick them out of the nest and don't review their pull requests. I'm just kidding.
To that end, what advice would you give to junior developers, like intermediate and senior developers?
For juniors, ask to pair with people. Get like annoying about it until people do. And generally it's all about the social. It's all about making those social connections, and pairing is a wonderful way of doing that, especially on your team specifically. Try to work with everyone that is on your team, or as you're getting onboarded, try to work with everyone that's on your team or that your team touches. yeah, there's not much better than that. For juniors, also in general, study the history of our industry. There's a lot there that's easy to miss, and to some degree that means the technical history. There's some really important stuff in like the history of Smalltalk and Lisp that I think is really helpful for a lot of people to realize that like there's nothing new under the sun, and actually some of the stuff that we used to use is more advanced than what we use now. But also the social history of software. It's a little more accessible than it used to be. There's this wonderful book now called A People's History of Computing, which is just like one fairly approachable example of the genre that I read recently. And it'll bake your noodle like what they were doing back in the 70s before PCs ruined everything. But yeah, history is important.
I really like how you added pairing as the #1 thing juniors should do, because it also gives the person an ability to work on a lot of different projects very quickly.
But I want to be careful about that, because here's the thing: a lot of people, for a lot of the people that don't like pair programming, a lot of it stems from a bad early experience. And let's be fair, it's really easy to crush somebody's to just crush somebody when you're a senior and they're a junior, and they're too slow for you or something like that. There's a lot of opportunities here for really ugly social dynamics. So I don't want to don't want to talk about that like it's just a panacea. Grouping, I think, can be better in that regard because there's more people in the room. It's really bad when you have when you're a junior and you're just paired with one person. I mean, you could get lucky and they're amazing, and your career is just slingshotted by that interaction, but also it could really stifle you. So it's important, I think, if you're gonna put that into practice, to be an advocate for yourself, for pairing, for lack of a better word, promiscuously, and also for studying how people pair in strong pairing cultures, because a lot of what people call pairing out there is really sit there, shut up and watch me code. Either that or put your hands on the keyboard while I judge you.
Oh, you're using that keyboard.
Oh God, yeah. But while we're still on the topic of advice for junior programmers, my biggest thing is just be careful of the passion gospel out there. This is an industry that has made a lot of its money for investors by exploiting the idea that the place that you work can also be the thing that you are most passionate about in your life. And they use this word everywhere. And you see it in job ads all the time. Like, if you're not passionate, what are you even doing here? Guard your passion to yourself. It's yours. It's, whether it's for gardening or for, the people that are important to you in your life, or for humanitarian work or whatever, it's yours. And there is no call for a company to tell you that's the thing that you should be pouring your passion into.
Yeah, I've had a job interview where they asked what kind of personal projects do I work on the side. Like, well, that is mine.
Yeah,
you shouldn't care about that.
I've heard I heard of one where they were like, so what do you get up to in your free time? Or what do you do for fun on the weekends? It's like, first of all, that question's illegal. Second, for a good reason.
Yeah. It's a whole different topic. There's way too much in there. So yeah, let's move on to something a bit lighter. What have you been learning recently?
What have I been learning recently? I spend a lot of time thinking about systems theory and trying to learn more about that these days. I spend a ton of my energy trying to understand the how we got to where we are as an industry. a lot of sort of sociology of programming stuff, which don't ask me to reel off a bibliography off the top of my head. But yeah, a lot of my learning these days is less specific technology and more like why things are the way they are in our industry. Tech wise, I'm trying to think what the last thing I learned. The last thing that I sat down to learn was I sat down to get better at PHP because I run my hey, like 3/4 of the internet runs on PHP. So
Yeah.
you can't mock PHP.
I have to go back into learning PHP again because my company supports a website that is on PHP. So I'm like, okay, have to learn this.
One of the bees in my bonnet is that language judginess serves nobody. And sort of the holier than thou stuff, language wars, I don't think that does anybody any good. You're just stunting your own career with that shit.
Yeah.
Things are there are some goofy ass things in some languages, and they're all there for a reason. It's all history, and the history is interesting sometimes. And sometimes you realize, oh, that thing that seemed like there's a syntax in PHP that there's like 2 alternate syntaxes for most control structures, and I was like, what is this shit? When I saw like the alternate syntax, they gave me explicit permission to cuss in this. I asked before we got started for the
it was
record.
VanRuby approved.
And the first time I saw the alternate syntax, I was like, that is because it was like if and if and stuff like that. Turns out that alternate syntax works beautifully when it's embedded in like the markup as you're like assembling some HTML. It actually works way better than like the thing in Ruby where if you're doing some kind of embedded Ruby in HTML, you wind up with like, the start of a block and then like another whole markup thing that's just for a closing curly brace.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes you find out this stuff actually has a good reason.
Yeah, I attended a talk on the reasons why JavaScript has their weirdness, like kind of like the Gary Bernhardt
Right. Yeah.
But this girl explained all the reasons on why that happened, and that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything has a reason. Every code that we hate has a reason. In fact, sometimes code that we hate on is actually a really good way of doing things back in that time.
Right. Absolutely.
Quentin has a question. How do you have any suggestion on pairing tasks? And how do you share knowledge?
Pairing tasks, like what to pair on?
Like, yeah, what's the ideal task that you would want to pair on as a junior?
I'm tempted to just say there is nothing you can't pair on. Like you can absolutely pair on documentation and your documentation will be better for it. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to that one because there's not like, to me, there's not a wrong answer, I guess. I guess there are some things that are like boring to do.
I feel like a lot of times people kind of reject a pairing request because they say there's not enough shared knowledge. So do you think that it's a good idea to work on tasks where like they're on a totally different team, or should you stick to things that you kind of both have an idea of already?
Oh, I mean, for me, it's all about knowledge transfer. So I kind of lean towards teach me something completely new. I really, teach me copywriting. Teach me like how we work with, what is it, HubSpot to understand how the users are using the site. Stuff like that. I really love that stuff. It's scary sometimes. It's out of your comfort zone. It's way easier to pair with somebody who's just, knocking some integers together, but that's where a lot of the growth comes from.
It's really good. Jonah has another question. What are your favorite resources on systems theory?
Ooh, that's a good question. This is where my brain freezes up and I fail to
Right.
come up with anything good. Let's see. You know, it might be easier to cite people. Hang on, let me eyeball a book from across the Nora Bateson. Look up stuff by Nora Bateson. She's at an interesting like crossover point of systems theory and poetry and ecology. Really mind expanding author. And also follow, like, probably someone you can like follow references to other interesting works.
Oh, another question from Alex. This one's really good. How do you approach learning something new? Do you deep dive into literature and docs, or do you immediately like getting your hands dirty?
Okay. Oh, you know what? Before I answer that one, hold that thought. One other thing that I should mention about learning systems theory is my partner Jessica Kerr and Kent Beck occasionally run a workshop on systems thinking for developers. I don't know when they have the next one planned or if they have a next one planned, but if you see that one of those coming up, I highly recommend.
They do in fact also have like a really good talk online just to prime people on
right. Yeah.
Doing those like putting those things on paper for real life situations or career situations or anything. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm hella biased, but you know, read Jess's blog, jessatron.com. She spends more time thinking about systems than I do, and it's all really good stuff. Okay, so the question was, what was the question? The next question was
approaching learning something new.
Oh yeah,
like deep dive.
so this is kind of this is kind of ironic for somebody who makes videos for a living, but for me myself, I usually like to dig heavily into a book or a book or three when I'm learning something brand new. I usually will sit down, like if it's a programming language, I will sit down with the best book I can find on it, usually get some recommendations, and I'll read through maybe, you know, 2/3 of it before I start seriously like writing anything in it. But that's just the way my brain works. Your mileage may vary.
So Paul has a question. When you write a book like Exceptional Ruby, how do you approach learning what you need to write it? How much time do you need to spend playing around with lesser known parts of Ruby? And how do you balance that with your other working priorities in making it profitable enterprise?
Okay, a bunch of good questions there. So Exceptional Ruby is kind of, well, exceptional in that came out of a talk, and the talk was one of those talks that you write a proposal about something that you wish you knew more about. And for that one, it was really like, I didn't feel like I had a solid like theory of errors, like a theory of how do I systematically approach them. And so that was kind of an excuse to deep dive. That talk was an excuse to deep dive into how different people in different programming languages have handled errors and understand, like, build more of a theory over it. And it was like really from that deep dive that I got some things like the 3 types of errors and stuff like that. So yeah, that was kind of like create the excuse and then then find out what I was going to put in there. And then the book came out of the talk. As far as like finding the time, well, there was a question at the end about making money from it, and the making the book from that talk was a very mercenary endeavor. It was like, okay, I've sunk how many, you know, hundreds of hours into this research. I wonder if there's a way to like recoup some of that. So yeah, that was that. Do a talk and then, you know, take all the material that fell on the cutting room floor and make a book out of it. That's a great way of making that stuff pay off. As far as finding the time, that one's hard. It is wonderful to find an employer that understands that like building you up is part of building them up. Wonderful and rare. I semi lucked out with that. I wouldn't say that they were always perfectly supportive, but generally like, yeah, there's not a great answer to that one. Time is in short supply, and I had a lot of sleepless nights early on, especially like juggling children and book writing and work.
All right. Let's see. So Jesse has a question. I'm gonna reserve Munchie's question for like the last one because that is really fun. I inherited Ruby as a part of a wider platform I'm responsible for. Talent is hard to find besides VanRuby. Should I be where besides VanRuby should I be looking? How can I convince or pitch people from other backgrounds to do Ruby on Rails, dev, when it seems like Node.js and Golang are overtaking in terms of web tech popularity and trajectory?
Yeah, there's a problem here where the distance grows very wide between the perception of what's hot and what's actually powering everything. You know, because if you look at the list of things that Ruby is powering, it's so much. It's just that it's so established. It's all at this point. It's mostly so established that it's invisible. You know, I guess the first question is like, are you only looking locally or are you looking remote? Because that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I don't actually know like where the good Ruby jobs boards are. I apologize for that. That's not a topic I'm really up on.
If anyone finds a good Ruby job board, let us know as well. I would love to find one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I saw the local first comment pass by, and I think that's like that's a big differentiator. You know, in this day and age, I mean, let's face facts. Software developers are a really privileged bunch. We get to be relatively choosy compared to most workers out there. And post-pandemic, I think most developers are like, why should I have to go into an office? So yeah, that's a big limiter if you can't hire remotely.
All right, we probably have one last question. Would you rather have a time machine or a teleporter?
Teleporter, no
really
question.
Teleporter.
Yeah.
Why teleporter?
I have family and kids and people and all kinds of people dear to me that live all over the place, and a teleporter would freaking change my life.
I'll be over for dinner and the second dinner and the third dinner.
Yeah, that's an easy one.
That's awesome. Well, we have 3 minutes. I don't think we have another time for another heavy question that I have. So that's for next time. Thank you again for joining us. You're our hero. Obviously, we've read all of your books, and I was at first 5 seconds of seeing him like so starstruck, like, keep yourself together. And thank you for joining us, and thank you for giving us
Thank you so much.
time to talk about everything.
This was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for joining VanRuby. If you guys have any questions, or maybe Avdi can answer your questions on Twitter or something, that would be the easiest. And thank you for joining. And again, if you guys are looking for jobs, Unbounce is hiring, Clio is hiring, Supercast is hiring, and all the others who have mentioned on the chat. And thank you